I'm intentionally posting this the month before we learn about the specifics of the Switch 2, and likely a few faces that will be in the launch lineup of games. And so I hope this video acts as either a portend of eerie accuracy that will lift F-Zero from the dead, or a war cry people will look back upon in years as Captain Falcon's corpse still gathers dust. But as far as we are from being back per se, we're pretty much closer to being back than ever. The Switch got F-Zero 99, a free-to-play competitive multiplayer take on F-Zero that, while a disappointing reveal at first, was still incredibly addicting and hopefully the crouton of a Caesar salad awaiting us on the Switch 2. But as often as people cry because they miss F-Zero, I do feel sometimes a disservice is done when it comes to explaining why this series is so bewitching. Why do we want Captain Falcon in games besides Super Smash Bros? F-Zero was a launch title for the Super Nintendo in 1991, intended to be one of the killer apps that would help the console out of the gates up front, a shot in the arm with a brand new IP alongside a more familiar face in the form of Super Mario World. It was a match made in heaven, Mario being a more casual game of high quality that would keep loyalists pinned down, and F-Zero being something daring and new. Nintendo hadn't really explored sci-fi settings outside of Metroid at this point. We'd still have 2 years before Star Fox would come along. So there was an opportunity for story and concepts you wouldn't find elsewhere at this point in Nintendo's legacy. Anyone who got this game for their shiny new Super Nintendo was greeted by a detailed parable leading up to this point in the F-Zero manual.
In the latter half of the 20th century, mankind was gripped by the fear of being invaded by extraterrestrials. They referred to extraterrestrial spacecrafts as UFOs, or unidentified flying objects. Now, to those of us in this day and age, this sounds like a fairy tale. It is now the year 2560, and due to the human race's countless encounters with alien life forms throughout the universe, Earth's social framework has expanded to cosmic proportions. Now trade, technology, transfer, and cultural interchange are carried out on an interplanetary basis. The multi-billionaires who earn their enormous wealth through intergalactic trade, while satisfied with their rich lifestyles, also yearned for new entertainment to stimulate their lazy lives. Their wishes were met by a call for a new project based upon a seemingly simple premise. Why not hold, on a galactic scale, some competition like the F1 races held on Earth centuries ago? At once, everyone jumped at this idea. Rich merchants from cities in the clouds or asteroids with their almost uninhabitable environments invest their wealth in construction of racing circuits. These racing circuits were located as high as 300 feet above the ground and held in place by anti-gravitational guide beams on both sides of the course. The racing machines developed for these tracks use the very latest in supermagnetic technology and were designed to travel without wheels, hovering 1 foot above the course track. When the first Grand Prix race was held, people were angered at the brutality of the competition. The organizers had, during construction, placed various obstacles and traps along the raceway. But as time passed and people grew used to these dangers, they soon demanded even more excitement in the race. In time, winning this race meant the highest honor that could be bestowed upon anyone in the universe. In a very short time, people came to call this Grand Prix simply F-Zero.
The F-Zero Grand Prix was created by the upper class. That much is clear from the game's backstory. But when you look at the racers pulled in, you get the idea that the suits that run the operation aren't putting themselves on the line for the entertainment. The participants of F-Zero hail from every corner and risk a great deal participating. It's hard to imagine they would if it weren't for that captivating prize money. Although F-Zero pilots are held in high regard, they all have rough edges and side hustles, which makes it pretty clear that they still need to put bread on the table, and are doing so as entertainment for the 1%, in sort of an axe forgets but tree remembers sort of dynamic. This isn't a mascot circuit where Mario and Bowser unite for fun sport, it's borderline gladiatorial pageantry with huge stakes in the distant future. Captain Falcon, Samurai Goro, and Pico are all iconoclasts of mysterious background, rumored to be assassins and bounty hunters. The exception that sort of proves the rule is Dr. Stewart, with an ostensibly white-collar occupation in paramedics, who joins the race as sort of a grand gesture in the effort of helping people who get injured during this barbaric sport. 3 of your 4 options in this first SNES game are morally ambiguous at best, pretty different from the Mario ensembles that Nintendo players had before. You can pretty easily gather F-Zero Racing in this tech-involved future is entertainment for the public, but it's also something of a crucible, a place for progenitors of scum and villainy to sort out their rivalries without endangering civilians, to settle scores and maybe thin their own ranks while viewing audiences enjoy a beverage and place bets on who crashes and burns. Grim as that sounds, Captain Falcon's modus operandi as the main protagonist makes itself clear pretty fast within that very same manual that exposed the wider history of the sport, where he attends a race and lives up to his reputation as a seeker of criminal bounties as he arrests a wealthy benefactor without prejudice. He's sporting on the racetrack, but is just as open to making sure the fat cats watching him don't get to finish their wine. And it's that spirit that carries into Captain Falcon's exuberant appearances in the Super Smash Bros. Games and other gatherings. A guy who's happy to get his hands dirty, but always for an unselfish cause. He's playing the futuristic death race, but has his neck on a swivel for those who would exploit them from both the inside and out. It's not a complex story or cast of characters per se, but again, it's a far cry from the Save the Princess fare Nintendo IP generally trafficked in up till this point. The sequels, F-Zero X on the Nintendo 64 and GX for the GameCube, would broaden the cast of racers with increasingly macabre and sort of counter drivers. Genetic experiments, war renegades, supervillain, F-Zero accepts all comers. These grand contests do not always have the pilot's best interest as a priority, so discovering the different reasons they would risk life and limb, be it money, pride, or rivalry, was always fascinating. An interest that's always extended to wrecking an opponent's machine on the racetrack. The slight edge of F-Zero's world is beautifully reflected in its sort of intense gameplay. When picking a racing game in any era, you generally had to pick between 2 extremes, either something sort of realistic or something cartoony, often with the word kart in the title. F-Zero was sort of the third space I think is and has been broadly missing from the racing genre. It had the atmosphere and challenge higher than most kart racers, but a competitive party game edge in the ways you can slow your foes down and boost yourself. None of this is to say there aren't terrific games in both of those alternative realms, but F-Zero hits a balance that I haven't found anything like. You're not driving a kart or a photorealistic BMW, but an aircraft that can reach absurd speeds despite their rather apparent weight and elaborate structures. There's certainly a huge range between featherweight speeders and heavy powerhouse machines, but no matter your choice, you will go fast, faster than any other racing game you can put your hands on. If you're just a kid trying out F-Zero for the first time, you'll probably be downright bewildered by your own velocity and how fast and competitive your competition is, as you blur to lead a pack of 29 other drivers. In a time where Mario and Crash were competing with 8 rivals at a time, F-Zero pitted you against 30, including yourself. This gives each race a massive scope, and not for anything arbitrary. I find most games with a Grand Prix mode of sorts can only distribute points earned per race so generously, meaning you more or less have to place first in every track to secure a victory. But in F-Zero, 30 racers are sharing points after a race and can earn up to 100 points for a first place. Given the huge number of racers at a time, in conjunction with the overall faster pace of the game, it's not uncommon to be able to boomerang back from a rough attempt. Placing 10th or so still lends you enough points that being on your A game for the rest of the tournament may allow Mercy to look down on you and still clinch an overall cup victory. You'll need that leniency in the heat of the actual racing, where you risk a lot with your every choice. If the footage I've shown hasn't tipped it off, In tandem with your vehicle's insane speeds, the tracks are downright treacherous. The feel of these games means with enough care and practice, you will feel like a driving genius navigating these tight turns and narrow pathways. On top of that, you will always have to keep an eye on your energy meter. Frequently placing first isn't always the biggest hurdle that keeps me from winning an F-Zero, as opposed to crossing that finish line in one piece. There are no item balloons or force fields to be found in the F-Zero Grand Prix. Rather, your only big red button is for boosting, which you can do voluntarily at any point you want from the race's second lap onward at the cost of your energy meter. Of course, running out of energy doesn't mean just losing the ability to boost, it means death. Energy also depletes the more your vehicle wears and tears against opponents and walls. Taking even a tap with an empty energy bar causes your machine to wipe out. And this isn't a point where, oh damn, I have to wait to respawn and lose my position. You wish. Exploding or flying off the track results in immediate elimination. This means your choices as to boosting and navigating the racetrack's recovery pavement adds an extremely high-stakes X factor to the race. You can't just use all your boosts at once, you need to levy your remaining energy against how much you anticipate bumping into other racers or the racetrack's perimeters. Bumping and taking damage is a factor in every racing game, but not in a way that can be as immediately devastating and frankly fatal as in F-Zero. As straightforward a racer F-Zero is, the elements of its gameplay all come together to make something distinctly strategic and surprisingly cutthroat. If you can time a bump into a foe just right, you can burst them into flames before they even finish the race, which can really come in handy for kneecapping that other racer in the Grand Prix who's trailing just a few points ahead of you. Or your intimate knowledge of the stage can be rewarded if you know you can safely unload your boost power into the last stretch of a race when you know it's safe to do so. And there's little more satisfying than pulling ahead of your smug opponents into the finish line before them at the very last second. With that in mind, the racetracks in F-Zero are just as much a character as are the characters and their colorful vehicles, the F-Zero machines. It would have been easy to give everyone recolors of 1 to 4 variant machine design, but no matter how much the cast of F-Zero expanded over multiple games, the designs of the different crafts were vibrant and varied. If you've played Smash, you probably know Captain Falcon and his beloved Blue Falcon, but that's just the tip of the iceberg. The very best of F-Zero pilots in design and premise tell you a little bit about the futuristic world these games occur within, as well as the far-off galaxies that tie them together. Take Mighty Gazelle, pilot of the sleek Red Gazelle, and one of the principal pilots introduced in F-Zero X.
He was the pilot most affected by the major incident that forced the temporary cancellation of the F-Zero Grand Prix 4 years ago. Miraculously, he survived and was revived as a cyborg with most of his body mechanized. His purpose in life is to continue to run in F-Zero. And he entered this year's race as he did last time, overcoming the opposition of those around him.
Mighty Gazelle is an over-the-top, cool-looking cyborg, but when you get to know the guy, he's kinda chill.
Do you have a girlfriend?
Of course I do. I hope you don't think she's a cyborg too.
Thank you for the interview.
I love that it's not like he's hell-bent on proving his superiority as an android or angsting over the loss of his human touch. He's practically a self-comforted subversion of those tropes, which serves to show the medical and prosthetic advancements of this distant future. He doesn't see himself as less a man or more a pilot, just the same guy who loves racing in the F-Zero, with a cool metallic finish. The crash that begot Mighty Gazelle's genesis into an android has no small part in the lore of a lot of characters. Roger, Buster, and Drac are 2 machine handymen who were just fans of the races until vehicles owned by 2 drivers who have been unseen since the famous accident turned up in their garage unattended, letting these 2 enthusiasts live their dream in the legacy machines Mighty Typhoon and Mighty Hurricane. Contrasted by Silver Nielsen, the 99-year-old racer who has seen competition from before and beyond that career-ending catastrophe, because he's entered more races in his long life than anyone else and has yet to win a Grand Prix. He and his machine Night Thunder run on sheer stubborn spite. I think a lot of series would make a real meal out of the backstory fixture, like the big F-Zero crash, but I like how it remains more of a progenitor of smaller developments, including the purloining of Captain Falcon's blood to create his diabolical clone, Blood Falcon. The wider lore of F-Zero has taken a lot of really fun detours to tell us about the pilots by telling us about their vehicle too. Billy's another old favorite of mine, an evolved descendant of the first chimpanzee to help test a spacecraft on Earth. His machine, the Mad Wolf, appears a little nondescript, but they added some fun tidbits about it.
Concept for this project was to design a machine a monkey could operate. Because Billy has limited written language recognition, the design lab implemented a navigation system that operates with the assistance of pictures, colors, sounds, and smells. For instance, in track locations where it is sustainable to accelerate quickly, the smell of bananas, Billy's absolute favorite thing, is emitted into the cockpit, thereby exciting him and making him press the accelerator.
I've always been super impressed that over many games and guidebooks, almost every machine has some notion about their function and how it connects to the pilot and tells us a little bit about them, making characters hardly seen in gameplay outside a car seat feel larger than life on their own.
The Wild Boar is a heavily reinforced machine with extensive bodywork to make it a very powerful crash machine. This works well with Chain's tendency to smash into his opponents during a race. His ship also has the distinction of being the loudest in F-Zero history. It's even been rumored that the 4 airfoils along the ship's spine were added only to increase the sound output.
Many F-Zero racers hail from far-off planets with fleshed-out customs and physiques. I feel like you could devote little spin-off episodes to some of these far-out concepts. Some are even downright harrowing. The racer Octoman hails from a war-torn planet that's at odds with the Milky Way Federation, racing for the benefit of his people and 30 invertebrate children. Others, of course, are more lighthearted.
Hailing from the planet Huckmine, the Furikake people are known for the unusual custom of pairing for life. They find a partner and pair up with that individual and do not leave them until they both find mates to marry, and as a result, have new partners. Gomar and Shio are 2 such examples of this.
I'm just so deeply in love with the world these games inhabit. The characters get this boost from their far-off futuristic concepts, but they remain very human and frequently inhabit cultures and ideas we know of today. A lot of you probably know Samurai Goro as that Shmo assist trophy with the sword, when he's persisted as a main character of F-Zero by representing Japanese culture and samurai movie tropes tied with a sci-fi-esque desert bandit. Kate Allen is a pop star and fits our modern mold of that identity, but was also roped into the F-Zero after she sang at events, which is like if Dua Lipa put on a concert before Rage in the Cage, only to drop the microphone and dropkick Bianca Belair herself, whether human or robot or whatever the hell Zoda is. All of these drivers have occupations that are recontextualized in ways that show us what F-Zero as a mythos and world and game is all about. These are all things I could envision really singing in a new F-Zero. Imagine if some of these characters were tweaked and revamped a little, with newly witty and closely directed voice acting and advancements in cinematic and gameplay perks. These characters could reach a whole new avenue of memorability. Now, if I have some very specific thoughts as to the tone and atmosphere of the new F-Zero, it would involve exposing my kinda unpopular opinion, which is that as great as F-Zero GX is, I actually prefer F-Zero X personally, and I'd love to see a new F-Zero on the Switch 2 take cues from that game specifically. Mind you, F-Zero started as a blood sport in its earlier lore, and X has a lot of heavy guitar and imposing ideals that sell that, whereas GX seems to resemble a future where F-Zero in universe has kinda sold out. The newly added characters can come off as a little cutesy to me, and there's well-dressed interviews with racing champions, as if everyone has come around to accept F-Zero even if it has killed people, which is true to life, but NASCAR in the 22nd century isn't nearly as interesting as the salty spittoon-feeling race circuits that the first two games are more devoted to. And the narrative's real conflict without that intensity in GX surrounds more Captain Falcon being such an amazing driver that God himself is jealous or something. I just feel we can do a little better. Bring Falcon back to his roots. But you heard there's some bad guys both participating and funding the race, and that's what brings him behind the wheel. GX is a masterpiece in its own right, but I always had a lot of respect for the dingy N64 aesthetic of X. I know the blocky, simple visuals take a lot of getting used to, but the graphics were simple to keep the gameplay fast, and it was unfathomable the way these crafts moved and reacted back in the day. They could pull a Zelda with the game's aesthetics and embrace sort of a smooth, toyetic look instead of GX's heavy detail. That way on modern hardware, these cars can move even faster and maybe even house races with even more than the already absurd threshold of 30 we've seen. The online competitive possibilities are truly endless. If you're a longtime fan of F-Zero games, or if my video got you newly amped up, we're not far from that finish line of a new installment. At least, that's what I like to believe. And no matter what it ends up looking and feeling like, the return of Captain Falcon will be well worth celebrating.
Continue?